today I'm going to briefly discuss some common misconceptions about gold, fraudulent activity behind the underlying monetary mechanism, a review of the quantity theory of money and the monetary mechanism. And we're going to do this by starting with the comments of a standard linear economist. And a standard linear economist in this case, is Dr. Martin Wolf, who I'm sure you're all aware of, Mr. Bilderberg, Mr. Big Shot, Mr. FT commentator. So he wrote a few weeks ago, the biggest transition problem is the mismatch between the value of official gold holdings and the size of the monetary system. The value of gold held by central banks is circa 1.3 trillion, while global deposits in the banking system, according to McKinsey, are around 61 trillion. To survive the slightest financial panic, the ratio of gold to bank money would need to be an order of magnitude higher. So this is his first rumination. And then he goes on to say, a far more important problem is that of financial stability. Economists of the Austrian school wish to abolish fractional reserve banking, but we know that this is a natural consequence of market forces. It's wasteful to hold 100% reserve if depositors do not need their money all of the time. Banks have a strong incentive to lend some of the money deposited, so expanding the aggregate supply of money and credit. So that is the basic thought process of what I have deemed a standard linear economist. But these guys are respected and people read them and they're given voice. That's all rubbish. Okay, that is complete rubbish. You know, what was said by Martin Wolf, and I shall demonstrate why. But we have to go back to first principles. Now, in the beginning of time, silver was money. So let's assume that silver is money. Now, that procedure by which silver was determined to be money has been very well described by Carl Menger in The Origins of Money, which is available online, and I'm sure many of you have read it. So take that for granted. Now, the question arises, what do you do? What does a successful merchant or the successful individual, or any individual for that matter, do with their accumulated stockpile of silver beyond what they need, let's say, for daily expenses? What does anyone do? So, without sort of labouring on that point, the point is that everyone has a certain amount of silver in their possession, say. And the concept of keeping it safely necessarily arises from that condition. Now, you can keep your silver safely should you have small amounts of it. You know, you can keep it about your body, keep it in the safe, you know, bury it in the ground, whatever. Not really practical if you're a business or a huge merchant to do that kind of thing with your monetary holdings. So the concept of a safe storehouse was born. A safe storehouse. So just think of the necessary traits and character of the person to whom you entrust the storage and safekeeping of your silver. Not any old pleb with a key in the warehouse would do, but a person of the utmost ethics and standing. Now, temples had a role. I'm not talking about Greek temples, I'm talking about Eastern temples per se. They had a role in keeping hold of people's gold and silver on a safekeeping basis, just because there was no well, it was assumed that there was no intent on behalf of the priests and the pundits with doing something with it. So the point is that the person had to be of the most noble character. You couldn't just have anyone doing that. Okay. So, we come to the concept of demand. Not demand in the economic sense of supply and demand, but demand in the sense of demand versus time. Now, demand, keeping silver on demand, means keeping the coin at home, or keeping it with a receipt at this said storehouse. Now, this receipt would enable you to go and get your silver at any time, no problem. There might be a little charge for storing it, obviously, and this is what the Bank of Amsterdam was founded for many centuries ago, and it collapsed for other reasons. But the Bank of Amsterdam was a pure demand deposit bank that facilitated payments, and they used to charge you for keeping your silver there because they didn't do anything with it, you know, or gold. So the amount of silver that you would need on demand is a subjective decision, and it might need you to cover day-to-day living expenses, clothing, food, transportation, whatever. But the point is, it's an entirely subjective decision. So when you hear someone like Martin Wolf say, it's wasteful to hold 100% reserve if depositors do not need their money all of the time, you can see that he's usurping that subjective choice between what is needed on demand and what isn't needed on demand. But I don't think he would have the intelligence to realise that bit. Now, it's the remainder of the silver holdings that isn't required on demand that is used to create the principle of the silver bond and the associated counterpoint of the silver bond, which is the time deposit. Now, we should. I can't use that thing, so I'll have to draw this thing up here. It might take us some time. So let's say this. Let's say your silver holdings are represented as such. So this is demand. This is what you require on demand. And this isn't. That's not required on demand. That means not. That's all. So let's talk about the mechanism of what happens when a loan is created. So the initiation of a loan for productive enterprise could be fashioned from one individual, say, and obviously it would be fashioned from silver that isn't required. By definition, it would be required from silver it would be financed from silver that's not required on demand. So, the dispersal of loan proceeds by the borrower for a productive enterprise, hopefully, not for consumption, Gucci handbags and watches or whatever, creates a subset of individuals whose aggregate increase in physical silver coin is a sum no greater than the amount initially lent. So, I hope that's clear. Basically, if you spend loan proceeds, then there'll be a subset of individuals whose aggregate monetary balance will increase as a consequence of spending those loan proceeds. So what happens is you create another subset of individuals and each one of these individuals is now certainly at the margin in the same position as the person who fashioned the loan in the first place. So they would have received an incremental amount of silver, and they can determine again subjectively what is required on demand and what isn't required on demand. But the process doesn't stop there. It continues, obviously. And that's what it looks like, you know, in ultimatum. It looks like a kind of fractal picture when you disperse loan proceeds. So what happens? In modern economics, it's assumed that this is a multiplying process. Okay, now, I hope I made clear that at each juncture, it's a subjective decision how much is required on demand and how much isn't required on demand. But what happens in modern banking, according to Basel rules, is that instead of this subjective determination of demand, the bank need only keep, according to Basel diktats, say only 10%. So the consequence of that is that you are somehow usurping the natural mechanism. If I as an individual only wanted to keep, let's say, 20% on demand, but the Swiss diktat says that you only need to keep 10% on demand, well then the bank says, okay, fine, you know, you might want to keep 20%, but I only need to keep 10%, so I'm going to lend the other 10% out. The point is that that is a distortion of subjective determination. Now, I'm not going to go into this in a lot of detail, but the process that I've described here is the mechanism behind the determination of the interest rate bid or the time preference element of the interest rate spread. Now, we all know there are two prices to any underlying good, the bid and the offer. The bond market is no different. This process here describes the time preference element. The other element is the productivity, the aspect of productivity, but I'm not going to go into that here. So the point about it is that you do all this, you know, it doesn't happen, you know, one by one. It's a continuous process, And what happens is that you create a system